Good morning, everyone. Ben will be doing the Zoom essentials for us in a few seconds here, and we'll be ready to get started. While we're waiting for that, you can scroll through the screens and just see who's here. It's sometimes nice to get a chance to see all the faces. Different than if we were sitting in church where we'd see to the back of each other's heads. We get to see the fronts of each other's faces, which is nice.
Zoom tips participants in chat. To see who is in the Zoom room with you, click participants at the bottom of your screen, and you can see the participants list. You can chat with Zoom room host for technical support. Click chat and send a message. Private messaging between participants has been disabled. Remember to hit the Alt button, or if you're on the Apple, your Option key to see the icons at the bottom of your Zoom screen. To raise your hand for nonverbal feedback, click on participants. Click on one of the icons to provide feedback to the host. You can click on the icon again to remove it. In the chat box, again, at the bottom of the screen, you can push chat. For a little bit of the service, you'll be able to chat with everyone. And then you can message to the presenters or the hosts. But private messaging between participants has been disabled. Zoom controls, move your mouse to the bottom of your Zoom window to see the toolbar icons. To turn your video on or off, click the camera on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window. You will be muted during the service. Click chat to get a message, and also you can click chat to get the message to the participants and presenters. And views, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can go between gallery views so you can see everyone, or the speaker view, and you will only see the person who is talking at that time. And if you wish to change your name on the screen during the service, click on participant on the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom screen, hover your mouse over your name in the participants list, and click on rename and enter your name you would like to use. And this will begin.
Thank you, Ben. This morning we have Jan Price, our Religious Education Director, and Ken Hermanaut, our Choir Director, both watching the chat. So if you have anything that you want to say to somebody, let them know and they'll pass it on. I want to thank Kathy Schreff for the pictures that will be shown during the prelude. They're beautiful pictures of our garden at church. Welcome to Northwest Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Kimmy Regal, the minister, and today's service will be assisted by Jan Price, Ken Hermanot, and Ben Gable. Thank you very much for the staff support this morning. Our opening words come from the Reverend Eric Cherry. Guided by love, secured by hope, and made curious by faith, we gather together at a moment of beginning, both learning and teaching, welcoming the injured, healing, ever justice seeking. We bless this church with our love, with pilgrims and seekers, growing children, cherished seniors, guided by pillars, by leaders. We bless this church with our hope, praying and resolving, trusting and involving, some settled, some evolving. We bless this church with our faith. Let us receive our ingathering as a gift. May it inspire renewed commitment to a great covenant of love, hope, and faith. May our eyes be open to the opportunities for broad ministry within, throughout, and beyond. May the blessings we have come to know through this vision be a blessing to the world. Amen. Our offering this month are to help the Southfield Human Services, emergency services. They help the people in the city of Southfield with emergency needs, food, rent money, medicine, and lots of other ways of helping, and we invite you to be generous. We have announcements this morning. Ben will run the slideshow here in just a second. Next Sunday, the service will be deeper than diversity. Today we have a banter with the board after the service. So what'll happen is you'll be invited to a breakout room, but if you'd rather stick around and talk to the board, there'll be some members of the board to talk to you a little bit about what's been going on at the board meetings and to answer any questions that you have. Just stay in the main room. Don't go into your breakout room. Our Friday night social events continue with lots of exciting things. Small groups that are meeting all throughout the week and the month. You can find any links to these in the church newsletter or on the church website. Ben does a great job of keeping us up to date on all of that. So I invite you to go to the church website and check it out. We still are appreciative of your donations and pledge payments. We've now been able to make it possible for the transaction fees to be part of your tax-deductible giving, which has been very helpful to us. If you have a joy or sorrow this morning, I invite you to raise your hand either virtually or actually and let us know that you want to speak. Our first hymn this morning is Come My Way, My Life, My Truth. Will be followed by the message for all ages for our young people, the title of which is Sorry.
Come my way, my truth, my life, such a way as gives us breath, such a truth as ends all strife, such a life as healeth death. Come my life, my peace, my strength, such a life as shows the feet, such a peace as melts in rain, such a strength as makes a guess. Come my joy, my love, my heart, such a joy as none can move, such a love as none can part, such a heart as joys impart.
My friend Charlie is always doing stuff he shouldn't, and he gets away with it. even when he does it on purpose, like the time he took his sister Anna's favorite school picture and drew a mustache on it. "Charlie," his mom screeched, "you say you're sorry to Anna right this instant." And Charlie did what he was told, but I could tell he didn't mean it. So could Anna. "Now, Anna, what do you say to your brother?" their mom asked. A tear dropped onto the ruined photo Anna held in her hands. "Honey, you need to forgive him." Anna looked at Charlie. He grinned back. That's when Anna started to bawl even harder. She ran to her room and slammed the door. Charlie turned to his mom. "Geez, I said I was sorry. What's her problem?" "Jack, did you see what happened here between Charlie and Anna?" Charlie's mom asked me. I shrugged. I wasn't about to say anything. No way. Before I met Charlie, I was a nobody. The one the other kids ordered to move over in the cafeteria. The one ignored in class, and the one last picked for teams at recess. Then I was a somebody. I was Charlie's friend. I lucked into being his friend when I rescued Charlie's Frisbee from Mr. Finkelstein's roof. Charlie thought it was pretty cool that I didn't get caught. Being friends with Charlie wasn't easy. He wanted me to do things I didn't feel comfortable doing. "What are you, a goody-goody?" he'd say. "Besides, it's no big deal, Jack. If you get caught, just say you're sorry." I had to admit it sounded easy enough, and I was worried that if I didn't do what Charlie wanted, I'd end up being a nobody again. So one Saturday, I decided to follow Charlie's advice. I invited some guys over to toss water balloons in my front yard. "Think fast," we'd yell at each other, hoping the balloon would burst when one of us caught it. I had a water balloon in my hand when Charlie spotted my neighbor Mike by his mailbox. "Toss it to Mike," said Charlie. "Think fast," I shouted as I threw the water balloon at Mike. It was obvious he wouldn't be able to catch it, but I threw it anyway. The balloon burst when it hit Mike in the chest. "Bullseye," said Charlie, and one of the other guys cracked up. "Ha ha, very funny," said Mike, all red in the face. "Sorry, Mike," I called back. "Yeah, right," he muttered as he walked up his driveway. I thought saying sorry would make me feel better, but it didn't. I felt even worse because Mike and I both knew that I'd thrown the water balloon at him on purpose. A few weeks later, Charlie and I went to the auditorium to watch kids set up their displays for the science fair. Charlie noticed Lena putting together her styrofoam solar system. He nudged me in the ribs and headed in her direction. This is not good, I thought as I followed. Lena, you see, was my friend. At least she was until Charlie came along. I stopped hanging out with her because it didn't look good to be friends with a brainiac girl. I knew this hurt Lena's feelings, but a guy's gotta do what a guy's gotta do to be cool, right? "Is this a solar system you're making?" asked Charlie as he fingered the styrofoam balls on the table. Lena nodded and kept working on her project. "Wow, these balls are really light," said Charlie as he grabbed 3 and started juggling with them. "Leave those alone," said Lena. "You'll wreck them." Charlie ignored her and continued to juggle. Lena looked at me. I knew she was hoping I'd say or do something to stop Charlie, but I just stood there watching. Suddenly, Charlie tossed all 3 balls high up into the air and shouted, "Hey, Jack, catch!" I tried to catch all of them. I really did, but I can only catch 1. The other 2 hit the floor and didn't look so good. "You did that on purpose," Lena yelled at Charlie. "And you let him," she added, pointing at me. "Sorry," we both said. "Sorry doesn't cut it," she snapped back. Mr. Marcus, the science teacher, came over to see what the commotion was about. "What's going on here?" he asked. "They were messing around with my science project and ruined it," said Lena. "We were just having some fun, and we already told her we were sorry, right, Jack?" Mr. Marcus looked at me, but I couldn't look him in the eyes. I just stared at my sneakers and wished I were anywhere else. Jack, what do you think Lena's feeling right now about what you did? Mr. Marcus asked me. I looked at Lena and said in a small voice what I saw on her face. Really mad and sad? Are you truly sorry, boys? Mr. Marcus asked. Like I said, we told her we were sorry, said Charlie. Then show it. What? Show Lena you're sorry by making right your wrong. Charlie stood there, looking confused. I got the feeling Mr. Marcus was the first person who ever expected more than a sorry from him. It was obvious Charlie didn't know what to do. But I did. Lena, we're really sorry for ruining your science project. Then I turned to Charlie. Come on, let's go to the art room and get some more styrofoam, glue, and paint. It took us a while to fix the mess we'd made of Lena's planets. Man, this is a lot of work, said Charlie as he put the finishing touches of color on Mars. I know, said Lena. Charlie was quiet after that. When we were finally done, Charlie asked if I wanted to shoot some hoops with him and the other guys. No thanks, I said. I'm going to stick around and help Lena clean up. She smiled. That's when I knew Lena believed I was sorry for what I did. Hey, Lena. What? I think your project is out of this world. She rolled her eyes. Come on, wise guys, she said. I'll race you to the snack bar. Loser buys. Deal? Deal.
Our meditation this morning is called The Blessing of Our Larger Life by John Saxon. I invite you to join me in a time of prayer, meditation, and reflection. Be fully present here and now in this sacred time and space with ourselves, with each other, and with that is larger than ourselves. Source of all life, all love, all hope, known by many names and in many ways. We don't know who or what you are, or even whether you can be called a who or what. Our words fail us. Our minds fail us as we ponder the enormity, diversity, complexity, wonder, and beauty of the universe and this world. And yet we sense more than know that our lives are part of something larger, a larger life, that we are indeed connected with everyone and everything in one interdependent web of being. There is something, both immanent and transcendent, that nurtures and sustains our life and life itself, something that calls us and all of life to greater wholeness and harmony. We give thanks this morning for this day, for the beauty and the wonder and the mystery, for our family and friends, for health and work, for opportunities to learn and love and grow, for the love and support of others in times of illness or despair. But we remember too that others here in this community, in this city and around the world, live with poverty, hunger, fear, illness, isolation, violence, and economic insecurity. In the silence of this moment and in the silence of our hearts, may we hear the call to a wider perspective and a deeper resolve. May we live with greater compassion and care for ourselves, others, and creation. May we touch each other more deeply, hear each other more clearly, and see each other's joys and sorrows as our own. May we strive to become more than we are, more loving, more forgiving, more kind, more honest, more open, more connected, more whole. In these few moments of silence, may our hearts speak silently all the prayers of our lives, our soul's greatest joys, deepest sorrows, our triumphs and failures, our regrets and fears, our disappointments and losses, our hopes and dreams. May it be so. Our reading this morning comes from the book, The Burden by Rochelle Riley. In an interview with NPR's Terry Gross, Richard Rothstein, author of the book, The Color of Law, detailed how the Federal Housing Administration ensured its segregation by engaging to ensure mortgages that are in or near African American neighborhoods. The FHA subsidized creating subdivisions for whites with the requirement that none of the houses be sold to African Americans. African Americans were pushed into urban projects. The segregation of our metropolitan areas today leads to stagnant inequality because families are much less able to be upwardly mobile when they're living in segregated neighborhoods where opportunity is absent. Rothstein said, if we want greater equality as a society, if we want to lower the hostility between the police and young African American men, we need to take steps to desegregate. That's easier said than done in a culture in which African Americans still are not treated equally by banks, and segregation remains easy to maintain. As recently as April of 2017, a federal judge allowed a predominantly white neighborhood in Birmingham, Alabama, to secede from the predominantly Black Jefferson County School District, according to a Washington Post report. District Judge Hakala admitted that racial motives assail the dignity of Black school children and the community of Greendale. They could not prove that their actions wouldn't hinder desegregation in Jefferson County, but she allowed it anyway, ruling that parents deserve local control over their schools and adding when she was concerned for the Black students who had been made to feel unwelcome in the predominantly white schools. Racism continues because it always has. We now simply reinforce what has been done in the past to continue racist policies. Ken Hermanot sent me a court document about a police officer that was granted immunity after murdering a Black man. The judge spent most of the written decision decrying the evils of racism, but then let the police officer off because that was the precedent that had been set. He got off because others before him had gotten off. Today's sermon is about reparations. And the part we need to do is to recognize that racism will continue as long as we are unwilling to look at it. As long as we are unwilling to take new actions that make changes in our world, white supremacy will continue. It's not enough to say I'm sorry. We have to mean it and make it change. 40 is the Congressional Reparations Study Bill. 40, number 40 is the Reparations Study Bill that has been introduced by Representatives John Conyers and Sheila Jackson Lee every Congress since 1989. Every Congress since 1989. Every Congress for the last 30 years. John Conyers and Sheila Jackson Lee have merely requested that the United States study the possibility that reparations might be due African Americans. For 30 years, they have been asking for nothing more than the opportunity to study reparations. I live in a part of the world where it is painfully obvious that racism is being maintained. From an article titled "The Uncomfortable Truths of Home" by Nicholas Wu. 57 years after the official end of the point-based discrimination system, Detroit remains 85% Black, and just on the other side of the road, Grosse Pointe remains 95% white. Racially restrictive housing was ruled unconstitutional in 1948. However, private actors like real estate brokers and homeowners associations found ways to circumvent the ruling into private actions. The Grosse Pointe Property Owners Association implemented a system that the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights slammed as one of mathematical exactitude in its effectiveness in excluding religious and ethnic minorities. Prospective homebuyers were rated on a scale for their suitability for the neighborhood. If they cleared a certain point threshold, they would be allowed to buy a house. Criteria for prospective homebuyers ranged from whether their way of living was typically American, to their religion, to even a direct appraisal of the darkness of their skin. In 1965, U.S. Commission on Civil Rights hearing wrote that those of Polish descent had to score 55 points to be able to buy a home. The Southern Europeans, including Italian, Greek, or Spanish origin, had to score 65 points. And those of Jewish faith had to score 85 points. If you were Black or Asian, you were simply excluded from the panel's assessments altogether. If you were Jewish, and you did manage to score 85 points because your way of living was typically American or your skin wasn't too dark, they would go through a separate and entirely different screening process that then caused them to fail and not be able to buy a home. This all began in 1619 with the sale of African people. They were soon seen as not just workers, but sellable goods, assets. Thomas Jefferson is known to have said that breeding and selling slaves was more profitable than any of his other businesses. This disregard for African lives is perhaps no more evident than the selling of slaves, forcing families apart. From an article by Ta-Nehisi Coates, when the wife of children of Henry Brown, a slave in Richmond, Virginia, were sold away, Brown searched for a white master to buy his children and his wife so that they would be kept in someone to buy his wife and children. Thus he wrote, "The next day, I stationed myself by the side of the road, along which the slaves amounting to 350 were to pass. The purchaser of my wife was a Methodist minister who was about starting for North Carolina. Pretty soon 5 slave wagons holding little children passed, and I looked at the foremost one. What would I see but a little child pointing its tiny hand toward me, exclaiming, "There's my father." I knew he would come to say goodbye. It was my oldest child. Soon the gang approached in which my wife was chained. I looked and beheld her face, but O reader, the grace of agony. Excruciating horror of that moment again. She passed and came near to where I stood. I seized hold of her hand, intending to bid her farewell, but words failed me. The gift of utterance had fled, and I remained speechless. I followed her for some distance with her hand grasping mine, as if to save her from her fate, but I could not speak, and I was obliged to turn away in silence. Coates calls this parting of Black families a kind of murder. We now understand the generational effects of this kind of trauma. The trauma of these partings permanently affected families and individuals. This is the psychological, physiological, and sociological damage created by today in the name of law and order. In June of 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article in the Atlantic magazine called "The Case for Reparations." It is well worth the time it takes to read the article. Today I will quote from and summarize some of it, but I invite you to take time to read the whole article. He speaks of how African Americans left the South during the Great Migration, fleeing Jim Crow, lynching, and other forms of racism. Things were better in the North. He tells the story of one family, one man, Clyde Ross. His family were victims of a common practice of taking land that belonged to African Americans, saying it was for back taxes or some other made-up reason. Authorities claimed his father owed $3,000 in back taxes. His father couldn't read, didn't have a lawyer, didn't have access to the legal system, and the authorities seized what was his land. They seized his buggy, took his cows, hogs, and mules. Clyde was only 10 when this group of white men demanded this child's only possession, his horse. Ross said, "I had done everything for that horse, everything, and they just took him." The inhumanity of taking a child's only pet is a small but painful example of the horrors experienced daily by African Americans. Clyde grew up and went off to fight in World War II and came home to Chicago in 1947. Things were better. He married, he had children, his paycheck was his own. No Klansman stripped him of his vote. When he walked down the street, he did not have to move because a white man was walking past. There was only one thing missing: a home, that sacred badge of the American middle class. During this time, as the reading said, the FHA Housing Authority was giving loans to allow white people to buy homes, but not Black people. The FHA had developed a system of maps that rated neighborhoods according to their perceived stability. On the maps, green areas, rated A, indicated in-demand neighborhoods that, as one appraiser put it, lacked a single foreigner or Negro. Neighborhoods where Black families lived were rated D and were generally considered ineligible for FHA backing. They were colored in red. Thus, redlining was born. So in order to buy a home, Clyde Ross had to buy it on contract. In the book, The World According to Fannie Davis, Bridget Davis, the author and daughter of the woman the book is about, talks about this very thing in the city of Detroit. She writes, "Mama couldn't buy the home the way most people buy homes because banks and other lenders would not give her a mortgage. My mother was forced to enter a deal with a seller and buy the house via a shaky type of land contract. But the seller, Mr. Prince, wouldn't sell the house directly to her, despite the fact that the land contract was essentially installment payments and he had no risks. But he told my mother that since her husband's work wasn't steady, and her being a Negro woman, he couldn't take the risk, despite her hefty down payment. So Mama asked an older family friend, a black man with good credit and a long history working for the auto plants, to buy her dream house for her. He agreed. She had to trust this man who was not a close friend. It turns out many African Americans in the same predicament got swindled out of their life savings and homes by third-party so-called friends. Being on contract, or buying on contract as it was known, the buyer entered into agreement that combined all of the responsibilities of homeownership with all the disadvantages of renting, while offering the benefits of neither. In Clyde's case, he had to cover the cost of a boiler that blew out shortly after he occupied the home. He was paying by installments, didn't actually own the home, but had to pay for the repairs. Would remain owners until the house was paid in full. The buyer built no equity in the property. The seller carried the homeowner's insurance, so if something happened to the house, the buyer lost everything. These sellers would buy homes through a process called block busting. They would convince white middle-class homeowners that their property values were dropping because black families were moving in, and they would get the house at a deal and resell it to African American families at a huge profit. If the families missed one payment, they would immediately forfeit their down payment, their monthly payments, and the property itself. In the book Black Wealth, White Wealth, Shapiro writes, locked out of the great mass opportunity for wealth accumulation in history, African Americans who desired and were able to afford home ownership found themselves consigned to central city communities with their investments were FHA appraisers. Cut from sources of new investment, their homes and communities deteriorated and lost value in comparison to the homes and communities the FHA appraisers deemed desirable. And meanwhile, contract sellers became very wealthy. There have been many attempts by black homeowners to try to address this system of predation, forming associations and consortiums to take these policies to court were unsuccessful. In Clyde Ross's case, the suit dragged on until 1976, when their consortium lost in a jury trial. If there were any doubts about the mood of the jury, writes Ta-Nehisi Coates, the foreman removed them by saying, when asked about the verdict, that he hoped it would end the massive error Warren made with Brown versus Board of Education and all that nonsense. These policies, laws, and standard ways of doing business damaged black lives. They continue to damage black lives today. White families have handed on accumulated wealth through ownership to the next generation. Black families have no just with homes. In 1935, when President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law, it excluded families that were farm workers and domestic jobs, those heavily occupied by blacks. Coates writes that between 70 and 80% of African Americans were ineligible for Social Security for many years. The GI Bill similarly failed black Americans by mirroring the broad country's racist housing policies. Black GIs were not eligible for the GI Bill. In addition, anytime a black family would try to move into a white neighborhood, they were terrorized. The book Arc of Justice chronicles the story of a black doctor who tried to move into a white neighborhood in Detroit. These racist policies based in white supremacy have led to the very segregated society that keeps us from making any progress. Coates writes, liberals today mostly view racism as not active, distinctively evil, but as a relative of white poverty and inequality. They ignore the long tradition of this country's actively punishing black success. May have noted in his historic civil rights speech at Howard University in 1965, Negro poverty is not white poverty. but his advisors and successors were and still are loath to craft any policies that recognizes the difference. Throughout history, moderately wealthy Blacks have been subject to predatory loan policies and other ways of terrorizing. From 1921, when the Tulsa riots, also called the Black Wall Street Massacre, destroyed wealthy Black homes and businesses, to the housing crash of 2008, Black success has been targeted. It continues today when our president's dog whistle promises to keep low-income families out of the suburbs, code for continuing segregation. In the news just a few days ago, the Housing Authority of Alabama settled lawsuits for discrimination in housing, having given units in 2 brand new towers with nice views and other perks to low-income white tenants because Black tenants, quote, don't like high-rise buildings and prefer living in garden-style units so they can sit on their porch and come and go as they please, end quote. Reparations is a conversation that must take place. It is not enough to say, I'm sorry. We have to make up for it. We have to mean it. House Bill 40 must be taken up. It's time to acknowledge the damage of centuries of discrimination. Our final hymn this morning is number 112. Do you hear?
Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale on the main, in the sun, in the rain? Do you hear, Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush? Oh, hear the cry, fear won't still, hear the heart's call to will, hear a sigh's startling trill in your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear, all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear?
Our closing words this morning are from Mark Ballatini. They're from our hymnal, number 686. Go in peace. Live simply, gently at home in yourselves. Act justly. Speak justly. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and stint not the hand of charity. Practice forbearance. Speak the truth or speak not. Take care of yourselves as bodies, for you are a good gift. Crave peace for all the peoples of the world. You go, keep the dream of peace alive in your heart. I want to thank Ken for doing the videos for the music this week. It's been very helpful. Thank you. They're beautiful. I invite you to stick around for coffee and conversation. You have to bring your own coffee. We're going to breakout groups. The topic that I suggest for the breakout group conversations is talk about the first time you became aware of racism. If you'd like to stay and talk to the board, don't accept the invitation to the breakout group. Just stick here and the board members will be able to join you here. Thank you for coming.